I was never afraid of the woods, at least not until I realized they could lie. When I joined the Forest Service, I thought I understood what the wilderness was. I thought it was a place of truth. Wind spoke through the pines, water followed gravity, tracks told you who passed and when. It all made sense, a clean, patient rhythm that you could trust your life to. For years, that rhythm never broke. But then came that fall, deep in the Cascades, when something began moving through the forest that didn't belong. Not just an animal, not just a man. Something that used the rules of the wild to hide, but wasn't part of it. Something that felt older, colder, and aware. My name isn't important anymore. The name belongs to the version of me who believed that every sound in the woods had an explanation. I was 34 then, stationed out of a small ranger outpost west of Lake Wenatchee. Our district covered nearly 80 square miles of thick old growth, mostly Douglas fir and cedar, the kind that swallowed light even in midday. Most of my work was routine: trail checks, campfire warnings, the occasional missing hiker report that usually ended with someone sheepishly wandering out 2 miles off trail. I liked the solitude. The trees became a kind of language to me, a slow pulse that quieted everything else. Until late October. That's when the air started to feel different. We'd had a long, dry summer, so when the rain finally came, it came hard, cold, steady, and gray. It soaked the moss until it hung heavy from the branches. The rivers turned wild again. And then, 3 days into that storm, I got a radio call from dispatch about a fire lookout who hadn't checked in. His name was James Harker, a seasonal ranger working the late shift on Stormvale Ridge, a lonely, high-elevation post reachable only by a 4-mile maintenance road. They asked me to check on him, said his line had been dead for over 24 hours. Normally, I wouldn't think much of it. Those old radios cut out all the time in bad weather, but something in the dispatcher's voice felt uneasy. I left just after dawn. The drive out took me through a stretch of forgotten Forest Service roads, half-eaten by roots, slick with mud, the kind of roads that felt like they wanted you to turn back. When I reached the base of the ridge, the clouds were sitting low, pressing against the treetops. I parked the truck and started the hike up with my pack, flashlight, and sidearm, the rain a whisper on the brim of my hat. About halfway up, I noticed the first strange thing. There was a clearing where there shouldn't have been one, just an open patch of ground maybe 50 yards wide, surrounded by towering firs. In the middle stood a cabin, an old one, square, made of rough-hewn logs, the roof sagging under years of neglect. I stopped dead. I'd walked this route dozens of times over the years, and I knew every bend and fallen tree along the ridge road. There had never been a cabin here. For a moment I thought maybe it was an old trapper's hut or fire crew shelter I'd somehow missed, but the wood was too well preserved. The door looked freshly built, the hinges rustleless. Smoke, thin, gray, rose from a tin chimney. Someone was inside. I called out, "Forest Service," and got no reply. My voice felt swallowed by the fog. I walked closer, boots sinking into the soft ground until I was maybe 20 feet away. That's when I saw the sign nailed to the door. Property of U.S. Forest Service, Cabin 12. There were only 7 ranger cabins in this entire sector. I'd worked in all of them. There was no Cabin 12. A chill worked its way down my spine, colder than the rain. I circled the building once. There were footprints in the mud, bare feet, large but uneven. They led from the tree line straight to the porch and none leading back. I stood there listening, but all I heard was the faint patter of rain on tin, the kind of silence that feels like it's listening back. Something about it felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I turned to leave, telling myself I'd report it later, but just as I did, I heard it, a single knock. Slow, deliberate. It came from inside the cabin. My chest tightened. I called out again, "Forest Service? Anyone in there?" Nothing. Just the wind threading through the trees. Then another knock, this one faster. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. I don't know why I reached for the handle. Maybe it was duty, maybe curiosity, or maybe something in that silence drew me in, like a whisper behind a closed door. I pushed, and the door opened with a groan. Inside, the air was dry, too dry for this kind of weather. Dust floated in the weak light from the window. There was a small cot, a table, a lantern that looked decades old, and on the far wall, carved into the logs with something sharp, were the words, "Stay out of the trees after dark." The letters were jagged, uneven, gouged deep into the wood. My breath hitched. I took a step closer, tracing the edges with my flashlight beam, and that's when I smelled it. Something faint but unmistakable. The sour, coppery scent of blood. I backed out slowly, heart pounding. I looked around the clearing again at the thick tree line that seemed to lean closer, darker now, even though the sun hadn't set. Then my radio crackled. "Base to Ranger, come in." I grabbed it, voice shaky. "This is Ranger 3. Go ahead." "Status on the Stormvale Ridge check?" "I found a cabin up here," I said, hesitating. "Doesn't match any coordinates on record. Sending photos when I'm back at the truck." There was a pause. Then, "Negative, Ranger. There are no structures on that ridge. Are you sure you've got your bearings?" I looked back at the cabin. The smoke from the chimney had stopped. The air felt heavier. "I'm sure," I said quietly. Another pause, longer this time. Then the dispatcher said, "Copy that. Return to base. We'll send a team tomorrow." I didn't argue. Something in me wanted out of there, fast. I turned to leave, moving down the ridge trail, rain starting to fall harder, the forest growing darker by the minute. But halfway down, I glanced back and froze. The clearing was gone. Where the cabin had stood was nothing but trees, thick and unbroken. No chimney, no footprints, no open ground, just moss and fir trunks slick with rain. I ran. By the time I reached the truck, I could barely breathe. My radio kept cutting in and out. When I finally made it back to base, the other ranger on shift, Tom, took one look at me and asked if I'd seen a ghost. I told him what happened. He laughed at first, then stopped when he saw I wasn't joking. We pulled up the old maps, topo grids, satellite overlays, property records. Nothing. No structure, no historical marker, no cabin 12 ever listed. Tom said, "You probably saw an old miner's shack. Happens all the time. Place gets buried in the forest, storm shifts the ground, makes it look new." But I knew what I saw. I knew the smell in that room, the words carved into the wall, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had shown me something it didn't want me to remember. That night, I dreamed I was back there, standing in the clearing. The rain falling silently, the cabin door swinging open on its own. Inside, someone was sitting on the cot, head bowed, whispering something over and over. I couldn't make out the words until they stopped and looked up. It was me. And in my own voice, I heard, "Stay out of the trees after dark." When I woke up, my radio was on and someone was knocking at the station door. I froze in my bunk. The sound wasn't loud, just a slow, hollow thump against the door. Measured, deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. The wind outside hissed through the pine needles, and the tin roof popped as it cooled from the day's heat. But that knock, steady, patient, cut through everything. Tom had gone home hours ago. We were on alternating night shifts, which meant I had the whole ranger station to myself. The only lights came from the lamp over the desk and the dim glow of the radio unit. I swung my legs off the bunk, the floor cold under my bare feet. The knocking stopped. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring at the door. Then it came again, 3 slow, heavy knocks. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped closer. Every sound suddenly magnified. The creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the fluorescent bulb, the slow, rhythmic beat of my own heart. "Who's there?" I called out. No answer. The rain had stopped hours ago, but when I looked out through the narrow window beside the door, the porch was wet, the railing slick with water, and there, barely visible in the mud below the steps, were prints. Big ones, barefoot. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My mind tried to explain it away, maybe a stray camper, lost, disoriented, maybe even an animal standing on 2 legs. But deep down, I knew better. Those prints looked just like the ones outside the cabin, the same uneven stride, the same wide heel marks. I flicked off the lamp, plunging the room into a dull gray shadow. The woods outside were darker than ink. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned in closer to the window. Nothing. The knocking didn't come again. Only the wind remained, sighing through the trees like something remembering how to breathe. I waited another minute, maybe two, then finally sat down at the desk and tried to steady my hands. I wrote everything down in the incident log. 2,300 hours. Unidentified visitor at door. No visual contact. Prints outside, barefoot, large. The act of writing helped, made it real in a way my thoughts couldn't twist. But as soon as I capped the pen, I caught something faint on the air. A smell. Wood smoke. I stepped back to the window. The scent was unmistakable. Dry pine, burning slow, the same smell from the cabin earlier that day. It was coming from somewhere near the ridge, miles away, but the wind carried it straight down into the valley like a warning. By morning, I was half convinced I'd imagined it all. Sleep came in fragments, every creak of the station jerking me awake. When the sun finally rose, I poured coffee and stepped outside to look at the ground again. The prints were still there, perfectly clear in the morning light. That's when Tom's truck pulled in. He hopped out, chewing on a granola bar, eyes narrowing when he saw my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I gestured toward the mud. "Tell me you see that." He crouched down, squinting. "Bear, maybe? Big one, though." "Bears don't walk like that," I said. He shrugged. "Whatever it was, it's gone now." Then he straightened and pointed toward the tree line. "You still up for checking Stormvale again? Base wants a report. Apparently that lookout still hasn't checked in." The name Stormvale made my chest tighten. "Yeah," I said after a moment. "Let's go." The drive back felt longer than before. The forest seemed denser somehow, as if the trees had grown closer together overnight. We parked near the same access road and began the hike up, the mud deep and slick beneath our boots. Tom joked most of the way, but I barely answered. My eyes kept drifting toward where I'd seen the clearing. When we reached the spot, I stopped. "Here," I said. "It should be right here." He looked around. Where what should be? The cabin. There was nothing but forest, unchanged, undisturbed, no sign of disturbed earth, no open ground. Even the moss looked untouched. Tom gave me a careful look. "You sure this is the place?" I nodded. "Positive." He scanned the woods, then motioned uphill. "Let's check the lookout. Maybe your guy doubled back." We hiked another mile to the old Stormvale Tower. The steps creaked as we climbed, the whole structure swaying slightly in the wind. Inside, it was empty. Coffee mug half full on the desk, a field journal open, pencil still resting in the binding, but no Harker. Tom flipped through the logbook. The last entry read, 10:27, heard knocking. Thought it was wind. Not wind. We'll check in morning. There was no follow-up. I felt my stomach drop. He heard it too. Tom frowned. "Heard what?" "The knocking." He didn't answer, just looked at me the way people do when they're not sure if you're joking or unraveling. We radioed in the find, reported Harker missing, and were told to stay on site until a search team could arrive. That meant one more night up there. I didn't like it, but protocol was protocol. Tom pitched the tent near the tower while I went down to the creek for water. That's when I noticed something on the far bank, half buried under the roots of a fallen cedar. A board, dark with age, its edges eaten by rot. I pulled it free, and when I turned it over, my heart skipped. Stamped in fading paint were the words, Cabin 12. I dropped it like it burned. I don't remember walking back, just that Tom was already lighting the stove when I got there. I told him what I found, showed him the photo I'd snapped on my phone. He didn't laugh this time. "Maybe there was a cabin," he said quietly. "Maybe it got torn down years ago, flood or fire or something." But his voice didn't sound convinced. That night, we built a small fire beside the tower. The woods were silent except for the distant groan of the wind. Around midnight, the temperature dropped fast. I could see my breath clouding in the air. Tom muttered that it felt like someone opened a freezer. Then from somewhere down the slope, we heard it. Knocking. Not an echo. Not a tree limb. Clear, sharp, deliberate. 3 knocks, pausing between each one. Tom's eyes met mine. He mouthed, "What the hell?" The sound came again, closer this time. I killed the lantern. We sat in the dark, listening. Every instinct in my body screamed run, but my legs wouldn't move. The knocking moved around us in a slow circle, left, right, then behind the tent. And then something heavy brushed against the canvas. Tom unzipped the flap, flashlight in hand, but before he could step out, a low sound rolled through the woods. A growl, but deeper than any bear. It vibrated through the ground, through our bones, almost human in its cadence. Then silence. We waited for what felt like hours before dawn broke. When we finally stepped outside, the frost glittered across the clearing like glass shards. And in the snow-dusted ground between the tower and the trees were tracks. Massive, barefoot tracks that stopped halfway across the clearing and vanished as if the thing had taken flight. Tom refused to speak the rest of the morning. When the search team arrived, he handed in his badge 2 days later. I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe to prove it wasn't real. Maybe to understand it. But that night, when I came back alone to the station, something was waiting for me on the porch. A piece of wood. Rough, splintered. Stamped faintly across it, Cabin 12. I stood there staring at it for what felt like a long time. The air around me was cold, perfectly still, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. The board was warped, dark with moisture, but the paint, those letters, looked new. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the surface. My gloves came away smelling of sap and iron. That smell again. Blood. I brought the board inside, even though every instinct screamed to leave it where it was. I told myself it was evidence, something physical I could show the supervisor in the morning, something that proved I wasn't losing my mind. I set it on the desk right next to my logbook and sat staring at it until my eyes blurred. Outside, the forest was silent. No wind, no night birds, not even the low hum of distant water. Just silence that felt too large, too deep, like something underneath the ground was listening. I didn't even realize I'd fallen asleep until I woke to the sound of the radio crackling. It was faint, just static at first, then a voice, thin, distorted, almost whispering. 12, cabin, stay out, trees. I froze. It was the same rhythm as the voice in my dream. The same words carved into the wall. I grabbed the radio mic. Who is this? Identify yourself. The static hissed, then went silent. I tapped the unit, adjusted the channel. Nothing. For a long time, I sat there in the dark, my pulse pounding so loud it almost drowned out the forest. I started thinking about that missing lookout, James Harker, and that entry he'd written in the logbook. Heard knocking. Thought it was wind. Not wind. Maybe he'd found the same cabin. Maybe the forest had shown it to him, too. And then, maybe it hadn't let him leave. I didn't sleep again that night. At first light, I packed my gear and hiked back up the ridge. The rain had returned, but softer now, mist instead of downpour. The kind of rain that blurred distance made the world feel close and endless at the same time. I followed my GPS this time, marking every step, every turn. I kept telling myself I wouldn't find it, that there'd be nothing there, and I could finally stop feeling like I'd gone insane. But halfway up the ridge, the mist thickened, and the forest grew quiet again. That heavy kind of quiet that doesn't feel natural. And then I saw it, the clearing, exactly as before, open ground, dark soil, tall firs bending inward as if trying to hide it from view. And in the center, the cabin. Smoke curling from the chimney, door slightly ajar. My hands trembled. The air was colder here, as if the place made its own weather. The smell of smoke and something else, wet wood, iron, rot. I walked forward. My boots left no prints in the mud. That's what I remember most. The ground looked soft, but I didn't leave a trace. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside was dim, lit only by the gray light through the small window. The words were still carved into the wall. Stay out of the trees after dark. But now there was something else. A second line, etched below the first. You didn't listen. The cot was empty, but the blanket was folded neatly. On the table sat a single object, a ranger's badge, tarnished, the metal dull from age. I picked it up, turned it over, and my stomach clenched. The nameplate read, Harker J. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the stool. My flashlight beam shook as I swept it across the room. That's when I noticed the map pinned to the far wall, a tattered Forest Service chart of the district. It looked identical to the one in my station, except for one thing. There was a red circle drawn in pencil deep in the north sector, right where no official trails existed. Beside it, someone had scrawled, Cabin 13. My throat went dry. I backed out of the cabin and turned to leave. That's when I saw movement at the edge of the clearing, a shape between the trees, tall and broad, barely visible through the mist. It wasn't moving toward me, just standing there, watching. I thought maybe it was a trick of the fog, a shadow, until it stepped forward. Whatever it was big, 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its skin or fur was matted with rain, dark as the trunks behind it. I couldn't make out a face, only 2 pale eyes that caught what little light there was. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran. Branches whipped my arms and face as I tore down the ridge, the forest spinning around me. I could hear it moving behind me, heavy, deliberate steps that seemed to keep pace no matter how fast I went. Every few seconds there was a sound, a deep, hollow thud that wasn't quite a footstep, more like the echo of a heartbeat in the ground. The fog thickened, and the trees started to blur. I tripped over a root, hit the ground hard, and when I looked up, I wasn't on the trail anymore. I was standing in another clearing, the same one, the same cabin. Only this time, the door was already open, and inside, someone was sitting on the cot, facing away from me. I couldn't breathe. The figure turned its head slightly, just enough for me to see the outline of a ranger's hat, and I swear I saw my own face reflected in the window behind it. I ran again, this time not looking back. I don't remember how I found my way out. I don't remember the drive back. All I know is I ended up at the base station hours later, soaked, covered in mud, shaking so bad I could barely turn the key to open the door. When I got inside, the first thing I saw was the desk. The board was gone. So was the badge. In their place was a map, one that hadn't been there before. The same red circle. Only now, written in fresh ink across the top, were 3 words, Cabin 14, under construction. I don't remember deciding to sit down, but suddenly I was at the desk, the radio still humming faintly, my hands shaking against the map. The ink was wet enough to smear beneath my fingertips. Whoever, or whatever, had drawn that red circle hadn't done it long ago. The new mark sat in a stretch of wilderness north of the ridge, somewhere beyond the maintenance boundary. I'd never been out that far. No one had, at least not recently. It was marked as unserviced territory, no roads, no fire lines, nothing but unbroken forest stretching all the way to the Canadian border. Cabin 14, under construction. Something in the wording made my stomach twist. Construction implies a builder. Something or someone was making more. I wanted to tell myself it was some elaborate prank. Maybe Tom trying to spook me before he quit. Maybe kids messing with old Ranger records. But deep down I knew the truth. I'd seen the same handwriting carved into wood, carved into walls. I'd seen the same red pencil marks on maps that shouldn't exist. I packed my gear without thinking. My flashlight, compass, service revolver, camera. If there really was something out there, if the forest was somehow spawning these impossible places, I had to see it for myself. That's what I told myself anyway. The truth was simpler. I needed to prove I wasn't losing my mind. I radioed dispatch, said I was checking the northern boundary for storm damage. They acknowledged with a bored, "Copy that, Ranger 3. Log your coordinates every hour." Their voice felt 1,000 miles away. By the time I reached the trailhead, the clouds were low again, bruised purple and gray. A storm was coming. I started north, pushing through undergrowth so thick it clawed at my pants and pack straps. The ground was uneven, covered in moss and half-buried roots. I followed the compass more than any visible trail. About 3 miles in, the forest changed. The pines grew taller, their trunks narrowing toward the top like spears. The air was colder, heavier. I could see my breath even though it was late afternoon. The sound of my boots on wet earth seemed too loud, echoing like I was walking through a hollow space rather than an open forest. Then came the smell. Smoke. The same slow-burning pine, drifting between the trees like a ghost. I moved slower, Every sense on edge. My flashlight beam wavered over the ground. No prints, no trail. Only once did I see something that didn't belong. A wooden post driven into the soil, old and half rotten. A rusted number plate nailed to it read 13. My mouth went dry. Beyond it, through the mist, I saw a faint orange flicker. A fire. It came from another clearing, smaller than the first, but eerily similar, round, flat, bordered by perfectly spaced firs that formed an almost symmetrical circle. In the center stood a cabin. Fresh wood this time, beams still raw and pale like it had just been built. Smoke poured from the chimney. I should have turned back right there, but I walked forward, every step sinking softly into the moss. I could hear hammering now, slow, rhythmic, steady as the knocking that haunted me before. When I reached the edge of the clearing, the sound stopped. "Forest Service," I called out, voice catching in my throat. "Who's out here?" Nothing. The hammer lay on the porch, old and rusted, still warm to the touch. I took a photo with my phone. The camera flash reflected off the wet boards like a pulse of lightning. Inside, the cabin was unfinished, half the walls still skeletal, gaps open to the fog, but the layout was the same as before. The same cot, the same table, the same faint words carved into the wall. "Stay out of the trees after dark." Only this time, a fresh carving sat beside it, the letters deep and wet. "Welcome back." Something moved behind me. I spun around, flashlight beams slicing through the dim. For an instant, I saw a shadow dart past the open wall. Huge, fast, silent. The smell hit me next, wet fur and iron. Then the sound. A low, rhythmic breathing coming from just beyond the doorway. My flashlight flickered. I took a step backward, the wood floor creaking under me. The breathing stopped. I turned and bolted out the front. The forest swallowed the cabin behind me, the fog folding over it like water. I didn't stop running until my lungs burned. When I finally looked back, there was nothing but trees. No firelight, no smoke, no clearing. Just forest. It was nearly dark when I found the trail again. My GPS was dead, compass needle spinning uselessly. My radio crackled once, just once, and through the static came a whisper so faint I wasn't sure it was real. Cabin 15. Then silence. By the time I stumbled back to my truck, the storm had broken. Sheets of rain hammered the windshield as I sat there shaking, trying to make sense of any of it. I drove back to the station in the dark, headlights catching only walls of water and glistening trunks. When I finally reached base, every light inside was off. My key turned easily in the lock, but the door pushed open before I could touch it. The room smelled of damp wood and smoke. There on my desk was another map. The same one. Only now, circled in red across the entire district were the words, Cabin 15, inhabited, and taped beside it my photograph, the one I took of the half-built cabin, printed, clear, and impossible, because standing in the doorway of that unfinished structure was a figure, wearing my uniform, looking directly at the camera. For a long time, I couldn't move. The photo trembled in my hand, drops of rainwater falling from my sleeve onto the paper. It was me. There was no denying it. The same jacket, same patch on the shoulder, even the small tear near the cuff I'd gotten months ago while clearing a fallen branch. But the face in the picture wasn't mine. Not exactly. It looked older, hollow. The skin was too pale, the eyes sunken, the mouth set in something that wasn't quite a frown, more like a warning. And behind that figure, faint in the unfinished doorway of the cabin, were others, shadows half-formed, as if the forest itself was taking shape around them. I dropped the photo. The air in the station was wrong. It felt thick, like breathing underwater. The lights flickered once, then steadied. The map on the desk rustled, though there was no wind, and that smell, smoke and rot and something metallic, crept into my nose again. I reached for the radio. The line was dead. "Tom?" I called out, even though I knew he was long gone. My voice sounded strange, smaller somehow. Then I heard it knocking. Not from the door this time. From underneath the floorboards. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I stepped back, flashlight in one hand, the other hovering near my revolver. The sound came again, louder. Something beneath the building was moving, dragging itself across the foundation. The wood creaked, nails groaning. Then silence. I held my breath. And that's when the voice came through the floor. Not from the radio, not from outside, from the earth itself. It was muffled, broken, but clear enough to understand. You shouldn't have come back. My flashlight flickered. The beam caught the corner of the desk where the map had changed again. The ink was spreading, like veins crawling across paper. More red circles, each one blooming wider until the entire region was covered. The last one appeared right where my station sat. Cabin 16. Completed. I stumbled backward, tripping over the chair. My head hit the wall, and for a second, everything went white. When I blinked the world back into focus, I wasn't in the station anymore. I was standing in a doorway. The air smelled of smoke and wet pine. The floor beneath me was rough-hewn wood. I looked up and saw the cabin. My flashlight beam swung across the same interior I'd seen before, only now the carvings had spread across every wall, twisting words I couldn't fully read. The cot was gone, the table overturned, and sitting in the corner was the photograph, the one I dropped at the station, resting neatly against the wall. I was inside it. My breath caught in my throat. I turned toward the doorway, desperate for the open forest, but there was no clearing anymore. Only trees, packed tight and endless, branches curling inward like fingers. The mist pressed against the doorway like a living thing. I stepped outside anyway. Every direction looked the same. No sky, no horizon, only the muted glow of fog. Somewhere far off, a knock echoed, then another, closer. It came from the trees, moving slowly in a circle around me. I turned, heart hammering, flashlight beam slicing through the mist. Nothing. Then, for a fraction of a second, I saw something. Huge, dark, shifting just beyond the edge of light. Two eyes reflecting back, dull amber, watching me without blinking. I backed toward the cabin, my mind scrambling for logic, for training, for anything that could explain this. But the forest wasn't behaving like a place anymore. The mist swallowed sound. My own breathing echoed back to me, half a second late, as though something nearby was imitating it. Then came the voice again, this time closer, whispering from somewhere among the trees. You built it. I spun toward the sound, and there at the edge of the clearing stood a figure. My uniform, my hat, my posture, the same as the man in the photograph. Only now I could see the face clearly. It was mine. Every scar, every line, but the eyes were wrong. Too deep, too bright, like coals under ice. He tilted his head slightly, mirroring my own movement. Then he said, in my exact voice, they needed a caretaker. He raised his hand, pointing past me. I turned, and the cabin wasn't alone anymore. There were others, dozens of them, scattered through the trees' deck, faint outlines of cabins forming in the mist, walls shimmering like heat waves, roofs materializing and fading. Each one flickered as if caught between being real and not. Some half-built, some collapsed, some burned black. And in the doorway of each stood a figure in a ranger's uniform, staring silently toward me. I tried to run, but the ground gave way. My feet sank into mud that wasn't there seconds before. The mist closed in, pressing against my skin like hands. I fought my way forward, gasping, and when I finally looked up, I was standing in front of the first cabin again, cabin 12. The door was open. Inside, the walls were covered with carvings, names, hundreds of them. I moved closer, running my hand over the rough wood. Some of the names I recognized, range hikers who'd gone missing over the years, and near the bottom, freshly carved, was one more, my own. I staggered back. My vision blurred, the floor tilting under me. The air vibrated, low and steady, like the forest itself was breathing. Then, somewhere deep in the trees, something began to move. A heavy, deliberate rhythm. Footsteps too large to be human. Each one closer, shaking the ground beneath me. The cabin door slammed shut on its own. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of hammering, slow, steady, building something new. When I woke up, it was morning. I was lying on the ground outside my station. My uniform was torn, my hands covered in splinters. The map on the desk was gone. Everything looked normal. Birds singing, sunlight through the trees. For a moment, I almost believed I dreamed it all, until I stepped off the porch and saw it. A new signpost driven deep into the ground beside the trail. Fresh wood, clean lettering burned into the grain. Cabin 17, under construction, and beneath it, carved in the same jagged hand I'd seen on those walls, Welcome, Ranger. I stood there for a long time, staring at that signpost as the forest stirred awake around me. The morning light filtered through the pines, but it didn't bring warmth. It just made everything clearer. The wetness of the soil around the post, the hammer marks in the wood, the faint footprints circling it. Big ones. Bare ones. I wanted to believe it was a prank. Maybe Tom was still out there, laughing somewhere, waiting for me to call it in so he could tell me I'd been initiated into some unspoken ranger folklore. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Tom's laugh was gone. His voice, gone. And the forest was too still, too deliberate to let coincidence live here anymore. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. Just get in the truck, drive down the service road, and never look back. But I couldn't. There was something about that sign, something that pulled at me. So I stayed. That night, I built a fire behind the station. The flames caught fast, the crackle sharp in the cold air. I sat on the edge of the light, watching the darkness move like a slow tide beyond the trees. Every few minutes, I thought I heard someone walking around me. Not close, just enough to remind me I wasn't alone. The forest changes when you've seen its true face. You stop trusting the way the branches move. You stop believing that sounds are what they seem. Out here, silence isn't peace, it's attention. I remember once an old man from a nearby town told me the woods keep their own kind of census. He said every ranger, every hiker, every lost soul leaves something behind. And sometimes the forest doesn't just take people, it recreates them. The ones who wander too far in stop being visitors. They become fixtures, part of the balance, the caretakers of its darker corners. I think that's what the cabins were. Not bilm rings, vessels, each one marking where the forest decided to keep someone. When I closed my eyes that night, I saw them again. Dozens of cabins flickering in and out of the mist, each one humming faintly with the echo of a name, each one breathing. They weren't places to rest. They were placeholders, and mine was waiting to be finished. Sometime past midnight, the hammering started again. Slow, rhythmic, deep in the timberline. It carried through the trees like a heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. I tried not to listen. I told myself it was a branch, an animal, the wind. But denial only works in daylight. Out here, the night always tells the truth eventually. And then I heard the other sound, the one that still makes my chest tighten when I remember it. A whistle, not a human whistle. It was almost too perfect, too even, like something mimicking what it had once heard from us. It drifted closer, the tone warbling softly, almost like it was trying to call someone home. The fire began to fade. When I looked up, I saw movement between the trees, a tall, pale shape gliding just at the edge of sight, the same one I'd seen near the first cabin. Only now it wasn't just watching. It was following the sound of the whistle, moving in sync with it. And when it stopped, so did everything else. The forest, the wind, even the fire, all held still. I heard a voice behind me whisper, "It's ready." I turned, but there was no one there. Only the outline of the cabin, my cabin, taking form in the shadows beyond the clearing. Walls shimmering like breath on glass. I knew then that the forest wasn't something you protect. It was something that protects itself. Every ranger who thought they were here to manage it was just another set of hands, another willing builder, another piece of its memory. And when the forest decides it's time to keep you, it doesn't chase you. It just waits for you to accept that you never really left. I woke at dawn again, sitting in my truck, keys in the ignition, headlights still on. My body was covered in mud. My boots were wet. I didn't remember getting in the truck, didn't remember starting it, but the forest around me was quiet again. Too quiet. I drove. Didn't stop until the asphalt replaced dirt, until I saw the first flicker of cell reception on my phone. I pulled over near a diner just outside the forest boundary. I sat there for nearly an hour before going inside. The waitress asked if I was okay. I told her I'd had a long night in the woods. She smiled, nodded slowly, then said, "You rangers always do. Forrest doesn't forget faces. Something in the way she said it chilled me. I asked her what she meant, but she just turned away, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, her eyes fixed on the window facing the tree line. When she finally looked back, she said quietly, "They found a cabin up there last month. Burned out. Not on any map. You should tell your people to stop marking new ones." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized something I'd been too afraid to admit. The cabins weren't appearing on our maps because we weren't the ones building them. We were just the ones who discovered them when they were done. And each time a ranger went missing, another cabin was added to the forest's memory. Another caretaker, another name carved into the wall. It's been 3 years since that night. I quit the service, moved 2 states away, but sometimes, on still mornings when the fog rolls low, I hear that same whistle drifting through the trees behind my house, and I swear, sometimes I smell smoke. There are moments when I think about driving back there to see if Cabin 17 ever got finished, to see if the forest still remembers me. But then I remind myself, the forest doesn't forget. It just waits. And every time I close my eyes, I see that photograph again, my own face staring back, hollow and worn, standing in front of a cabin that doesn't exist on any map. And in the silence that follows, I hear the voice again, calm, steady, echoing from the dirt. "Welcome home, Ranger." They say the ground remembers. Every step you take, every word you whisper, every sin you bury, it all sinks into the soil, waiting for the day it breathes again. That's what I think about now, when I walk the trails at dawn. The fog still clinging low like a secret the forest hasn't decided to share yet. My name isn't important. I've worn this uniform for 16 years, through storms, wildfires, missing persons, and the things we never write reports about. I've seen the forest heal itself after violence, but I've also seen it refuse to forget. When I first started working in this park, a stretch of mountains and wetlands tucked between 2 forgotten counties, I thought my job was simple: protect people from the forest and the forest from people. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized those weren't 2 separate things. Sometimes the danger wasn't from outside. Sometimes it rose up from under your boots. That first week, my supervisor warned me about the caves. "Don't go poking around the old limestone systems," he said. "They're unstable, flooded, and worse, unmapped." He grinned when he said it, but his eyes didn't match the smile. That was years ago, but I remember it every time I pass the ridge trails. The ground dips in unnatural ways there, like the land is hollow, and when it rains, you can hear the faintest hiss beneath the mud, like air escaping from lungs long sealed. I didn't believe in superstition back then. You can't last long as a ranger if you let your imagination run wild. The forest plays tricks, echoes bouncing off trunks, branches snapping from wind pressure, animals making sounds you swear are words. You tell yourself it's logic, not legend, that keeps you safe. But that logic starts to crumble when you find things that don't belong, like the night I found the bones. It was late September. The air had that damp chill that seeps into your jacket no matter how thick it is. I was on night patrol, checking for illegal campers near the backcountry line. The radio crackled every few minutes, signal cutting in and out, as if the forest itself didn't want communication. My flashlight beam cut across a patch of earth that looked freshly overturned. At first, I thought it was a bear den. Then I saw the edge of a cloth, faded, blue, tangled in roots. I crouched down, pushed away the dirt, and found what looked like a forearm bone. Human. I called it in, of course. The sheriff came out the next morning, brought dogs and a forensic team. They worked for 2 days and came up with a story that made sense. Hiker lost years ago, probably fell, buried by runoff. But there were details they left out of the final report, like how the bones were clean, too clean, and how the ground around the burial site had been arranged in a near-perfect circle of flattened grass. The sheriff told me not to worry about it. Old cases dig themselves up sometimes, he said. But that night, when I lay in my bunk at the ranger station, I could still smell the earth on my hands. Wet, metallic, wrong. Weeks passed. The unease should have faded. It didn't. Instead, it began to shift into something quieter. A presence, maybe. I'd hear small thuds at night, not on the door, but under the cabin floor, like something heavy moving through the crawl space. The walls would creak even when there was no wind. Once I woke to find my boots moved from the corner to the foot of my bed, caked in mud. The others brushed it off. Rodents, they said. Settling wood. Maybe they were right. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd uncovered something that wasn't supposed to be found, that the soil had swallowed it for a reason, and now it wanted me to return it. About a month later, we received a report of a missing geologist, Dr. Hammond, 52, studying subsurface acoustics near the Ridge Caves. His camp was found intact, tent zipped, journal half filled, no sign of struggle. The last entry read, "Beneath 7.3 meters, the frequencies shift to something. Harmonic. It's almost like a pulse." The search lasted 10 days. We combed every inch of those woods, even the areas outside the park boundary. Nothing. Then, on the 11th day, one of our volunteers found Hammond's field recorder wedged between two rocks near the main cave mouth. It was still running, the tape coated in fine dust. We gathered around the player in the ranger station, expecting to hear static. What came through instead made my stomach turn. At first, it was just wind, then a faint dripping sound, rhythmic, steady. But beneath it, almost buried in the noise, came something like breath, slow, deliberate inhalations, followed by a single sharp sound, like a shovel striking rock. Then Hammond's voice. It's hollow. The resonance, it's moving. My God, it's moving. The tape cut out there. The investigation declared him lost to a fall. Case closed. But 3 days later, we found fresh footprints outside the same cave system. Barefoot, wide set, each print nearly twice the length of a man's. They led from the cave entrance to the stream and stopped. We measured, photographed, filed the report. No follow-up. After that, the other rangers started trading shifts away from that sector. No one wanted to patrol alone. Some said the caves had bad air pockets, carbon monoxide leaks that made you hallucinate. Others whispered older stories of a miners' colony buried alive a century ago, their tunnels collapsing during an earthquake, their bodies never recovered. Locals still refused to dig wells in certain places, saying they could hear hammering beneath the soil on cold nights. I didn't believe any of that until the knocking started again. It was around midnight, early December. I was on overnight watch at the outpost, one of those creaking wooden structures built in the 60s, windows fogged from inside. The snow had settled thick over the forest, muffling everything. No birds, no wind, just the hiss of my breath against the glass. Then came the sound. 3 knocks. Faint. From beneath the floorboards, I froze. The sound came again, this time slower, deliberate. I got down on my knees, pressed my ear against the plank, and heard something else, a low, drawn-out exhale. When I went outside, the snow around the cabin was untouched. No prints, nothing disturbed, and yet the ground near the porch felt warm. That's when I realized the truth that's haunted me since. Whatever was buried beneath this park wasn't dead. It was waiting. That night marked a change. The forest began to feel aware of me. Trees leaned closer when I passed. The soil softened underfoot, as if something beneath was listening. I caught myself talking aloud to the silence, apologizing for what I dug up. I don't remember when I started doing that. It just felt necessary, like acknowledgement kept it calm. Then came the spring thaw. The river swelled and the caves flooded. Whole sections of trail collapsed. I was assigned to monitor erosion damage along the lower basin. That's where I saw it again. The same circle of flattened grass, same soil turned as if from within, and right at the center, a single human tooth. Clean. Perfectly white. Placed like an offering. That was the moment I stopped thinking this was random. It wasn't coincidence. It was communication. And I think, no, I know, it wanted to be found again. I didn't report the tooth. Maybe that was my first real mistake. Protocol said to photograph, log, and send it for analysis, but something in me resisted. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was more like reverence or guilt, as if I'd stumbled into someone else's graveyard uninvited. so I covered it back with soil and moss, the way you gently pull a blanket over a sleeping child. The earth seemed to breathe as I did it, like a sigh or maybe a warning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin floor sounded like something trying to come up through it. The walls felt too close, the air thick with that damp iron scent I'd only ever smelled near open graves after a rainstorm. Around 3 a.m., I heard tapping again, not beneath the floor this time, but on the window. 3 slow rhythmic taps. I sat up, my hand instinctively going to the flashlight on the nightstand. When I turned it on, the beam hit the glass, and for a split second I thought I saw a handprint. Muddy, oversized, sliding down the pane. But when I stepped closer, it was gone. Just condensation, I told myself. Just the forest playing tricks again. Except the next morning, when I walked the perimeter of the cabin, there were prints. Not full footprints, just impressions like something heavy had knelt in the snow and pressed down with both hands. The fingers were long. Too long. Over the next few weeks, the park started changing in ways I couldn't explain. The air around the ridge trails carried a faint vibration, like a hum beneath the wind. Trees near the caves began to bend inward, roots curling around rocks as if grasping something beneath. Wildlife patterns shifted. Deer avoided certain clearings, owls stopped calling at dusk, and even the coyotes went silent. By early April, one of our seasonal workers, an energetic college kid named Mason, went missing. His radio last pinged near the same cave system where Hammond had disappeared. Search teams found his hat soaked in mud, no tracks beyond that. We all knew what the report would say before it was written. Lost during routine survey, presumed accident. But the part no one talked about was the smell. When we gathered at the site, there was this stench that seemed to ooze from the ground itself, like rust mixed with something sweet, almost floral. The kind of scent that makes your body want to recoil and inhale at the same time. It lingered long after we left, clinging to my jacket like smoke. That night, I dreamed of the caves again. In the dream, I was crawling through a tunnel, my hands sinking into wet clay. There were bones embedded in the walls, but they were moving, slowly shifting deeper like they were alive. I could hear water dripping, rhythmic as a heartbeat, and from the darkness ahead came a voice. Not human, but something close. A voice that said, "Don't cover it again." I woke drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around me like vines. My nails were caked with dirt. Real dirt. Something inside me began to break after that. Rationality, maybe. The steady logic that had kept me sane through years of rescue calls and accidents. I started checking the caves every day, even though no one ordered me to. I'd tell myself I was verifying stability after the thaw, but deep down, I knew I was looking for something. On the third morning, I found the entrance half collapsed, but I squeezed through anyway. The air was thick, humid, and faintly luminous, as if the walls themselves were glowing with decay. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, echoing into deeper chambers I couldn't see. I followed the sound, counting my breaths to stay calm. 20 steps in, I saw carvings. Not graffiti. These were older, primitive, etched deep into the limestone. Hands, circles, lines that spiraled inward toward a single point like a whirlpool or an eye. Beneath the carvings were bones, small ones, animal at first, but then human. Fingers, teeth, arranged in patterns that made no sense, except one thing stood out. Every circle of bone had a hollow center, a pit just big enough for someone's face. I don't remember leaving. One moment I was staring at that pattern, the next I was outside again, daylight burning my eyes. I checked my watch. It said I'd been inside for over 2 hours. I had no memory of that time. None. The other rangers started avoiding me after that. They said I was acting strange, that I spent too much time alone. Maybe they were right. I stopped eating with them, stopped answering radio calls for hours at a time. I'd sit near the ridge and just listen to the soil, the trees, the quiet thrum that felt alive underfoot. Then one afternoon, a storm rolled in from the west. Black clouds, low and fast, the kind that feel like they're crawling rather than moving. The ground trembled slightly as thunder rumbled across the valley. That's when the cave began to hum again, deep and resonant, like the earth itself was breathing through a buried lung. I ran toward it, rain blurring my vision, mud clinging to my boots. The entrance pulsed faintly with a reddish glow, just enough to see the shape of the rocks shifting, as if they were softening. I shouted into the cave, maybe for Hammond, maybe for Mason, maybe for whatever was listening. My voice came back to me, distorted, pitched lower, repeating not my words, but something else. It said my name. The echo wasn't quite right. It dragged the vowels out, made them sound older, slower. I froze there, rain pounding against my hat, and in that instant I felt the ground beneath my feet sink slightly, like the soil had turned to breath. The hum deepened until it wasn't sound anymore, but sensation, vibrating through my bones, behind my teeth, down my spine. Then it stopped. The storm passed as suddenly as it came. The glow faded, the air stilled, and for a brief moment the world returned to normal. But when I turned back toward the station, I saw something on the trail. Footprints again. The same oversized barefoot impressions I'd seen before. This time they led directly to my cabin. Inside, everything was undisturbed, except for one thing. On my desk, where my field map had been, someone or something had drawn a perfect spiral in dirt. At the center of the spiral was another tooth, the same shape, the same perfect white. I sat there staring at it for a long time, rainwater dripping from my jacket, the smell of wet soil heavy in the air. It wasn't just random, it was a message. But from who or what? The following morning, I took a sample of the dirt from the desk to our regional lab. I needed proof, something tangible, something scientific to anchor me back to reality. The report came back 2 days later. The technician looked pale when she handed me the file. She said, "This isn't from your park." The soil was rich in diatom deposits that matched samples found nearly 100 miles away, specifically from a quarry that had been shut down decades ago after a collapse. 27 workers were buried alive, their bodies never recovered. The site had since become overgrown forest, and eventually part of our park's expansion zone. That night, I sat alone in the cabin, listening to the wind scrape against the siding. The realization hit me like a slow bleed. We hadn't been protecting the forest. We'd been walking over graves, unmarked, unrested, unforgotten. And now, something beneath the soil was remembering us back. I tried to ignore it after that, to pretend that life could go back to the way it was before I knew. I filled my days with routine, clearing debris from trails, maintaining the visitor overlook, checking signage, anything to keep my mind busy. But it's strange how, once you've heard the earth speak, silence doesn't sound the same. It's not quiet anymore, it's watching. By late May, the park was green again. Ferns uncoiled, rivers swelled, tourists returned. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt like an intruder. Each step I took into those woods felt like trespassing. Every laugh from a camper grated on me, as if they were mocking something sacred buried beneath them. One morning, as I was repainting a trail marker near the North Ridge, I saw an old man standing at the tree line. He wasn't wearing hiking gear, just a wool coat and a wide-brimmed hat that looked soaked from years of rain. He was staring at the ground, not at me. I called out, "You all right, sir? This trail's closed beyond the ridge." He didn't answer, just kept looking down at the soil. I walked closer. He turned then, slowly, like it took effort. His face was pale, eyes glassy, but alert in a way that made my stomach twist. "You dug where you shouldn't," he said. His voice was dry as bark. "The ground keeps what it's owed." Before I could reply, he turned and walked into the trees. I ran after him, but the forest swallowed him up. There were no footprints, no sign he'd ever been there. I told myself it was stress. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I was still rattled from the cave, from everything that came after. But that night, when I locked the cabin door, I found mud smeared across the threshold in the shape of a hand, 5 long fingers, dragging inward. The next day, I went to the archives, old ranger reports, land surveys, mining maps. I needed to understand what had been buried beneath this park. Most of the early records were missing or blacked out, but one document stood out: Seismic Survey Log, 1962. It mentioned a series of underground voids detected beneath the ridge caves, structures too symmetrical to be natural. Excavation had been proposed, then abandoned due to unusual collapses and abnormal sound patterns. The last line of the report made me stop cold. Recommend area remain undisturbed. Presence beneath limestone deemed active. Active. That word haunted me. I spent that evening tracing the coordinates on a topographical map. The survey points lined up almost perfectly with the same spots where the bones, the tooth, and the footprints had appeared. A pattern, one that spiraled outward from a central chamber deep below. I had to see it for myself. So, on a Sunday morning when the park was quiet and the others were off duty, I returned to the cave. The air was cooler than it should have been for summer, the ground damp and breathing with each step. I brought a rope, headlamp, and recorder. Every instinct told me to turn back, but curiosity has a way of muting fear until it's too late. I followed the same passage as before. The glow in the rock was stronger now, a dull red shimmer like embers trapped in stone. The walls pulsed with moisture, and each drip that fell echoed longer than it should have. The deeper I went, the more the hum returned, not loud, but insistent, vibrating just below hearing. Then I reached a cavern I'd never seen before. The ceiling arched high, the walls slick with clay. In the center stood something that didn't belong. Wooden beams, rotten and collapsed, forming what looked like the remains of a shaft. The air smelled like salt and rust, and beneath that collapsed timber was movement. At first, I thought it was just runoff water, rippling faintly. But when I shined the beam closer, I saw fingers. Pale, bloated, pushing through the clay like they were trying to crawl out. I stumbled back, tripping on a rock, my light flickering. The hum grew louder, no longer a vibration but a chorus. Dozens of low voices, murmuring beneath my feet. My breath fogged the air. I tried to speak, to tell myself this wasn't real, that it was gas, light tricks, anything. But then one of the fingers twitched, and I swear I heard it whisper my name. I ran. I didn't look back, didn't breathe until daylight hit my face again. By the time I reached the ranger station, my hands were trembling so hard I dropped the flashlight twice. I wrote the report that night, but not the real one. I typed what they expected. Structural instability, potential sinkhole formation, area restricted pending further geological assessment. I couldn't write what I'd seen. No one would believe it. And even if they did, they'd dig deeper. They'd disturb whatever was down there even more. The following week, the ground began to shift. Small tremors rattled dishes in the mess hall. Sections of trail cracked open overnight. The soil along the river turned black and oily. We blamed heavy rains, but I knew better. Something was stirring, and then the knocking came back. Not from the cabin floor this time, from the trees. It started at dusk, 3 sharp raps echoing through the valley. Then 3 more, farther away. It was like a pattern, a code. The forest was calling back to itself. Even the animals reacted. Flocks of crows burst from the branches all at once, as if chased by something unseen. I tried to drown it out with radio chatter, static, anything. But no matter where I went, the sound followed, knocking beneath the ground, in the trees, even in my dreams. Always 3 beats, always closer. One night, while on perimeter patrol, I found another ranger, Elliot, standing motionless by the stream. His eyes were wide, fixed on the water. I asked what he saw. He didn't answer, didn't blink. When I stepped closer, I saw what held him frozen. Hands. Pale hands pressed against the underside of the river surface, fingertips scraping upward like glass between them in the air. The current distorted their shapes, but they were human. Dozens of them, moving in rhythm with the knocks. I shouted his name. The spell broke. He gasped like he'd surfaced from deep water, fell to his knees, and sobbed. We got him back to the outpost, but he wouldn't speak for days. When he finally did, all he said was, "They're not buried. We are." That line never left me. I started mapping again, connecting the points from the survey, the sightings, the disappearances. The pattern wasn't random. It wasn't even just a spiral. It was expanding, like veins branching outward through the park. Each tremor, each collapse, each new hole that opened, it was spreading. Whatever was beneath us was pushing up, reshaping the forest, testing the surface. By midsummer, visitors began to notice too. People reported hearing music from underground while hiking, low tones like singing whales. A family at the lakeside campsite swore they saw faces in the mud when the tide receded. A local church group canceled their volunteer cleanup after 2 members claimed they heard voices calling from under the roots. The park board dismissed it all as hysteria, stress, pareidolia, but I'd seen too much to deny it anymore. This wasn't haunting. It wasn't memory. It was emergence, and I had no idea how to stop it. I stopped counting the days after the first landslide hit. It tore through the ridge trail like a slow-moving avalanche, trees upended, soil peeled back to reveal layers that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. From the air, it looked like a scar cutting through the forest. But standing there in person, it didn't look random. It looked intentional. The line of collapse curved into a perfect arc, just like the carvings I'd seen underground. By then, we'd closed off the park to visitors. The official statement said unstable terrain, but the truth was worse. It wasn't the terrain that was unstable. It was everything beneath it. Even standing still, you could feel the faint pulse under your boots, like the heartbeat of something too large to comprehend. At night, the sound returned. The knocking, the hum, the murmurs. Sometimes I'd wake to find my furniture shifted, as though the cabin itself had been nudged. Other times, I'd step outside to see fog seeping out of the ground in small, circular patches. It wasn't normal mist. It rose in spirals, carrying that same metallic scent like wet rust and decay. I stopped sleeping indoors. I started camping by the river, telling myself I'd feel safer in the open. But the truth was, I wanted to feel exposed, to know where the danger was coming from. Because lately, I wasn't sure anymore. The forest didn't feel external. It felt like it was inside me. One evening, as dusk melted into full darkness, I heard footsteps, not from the trail, closer, directly behind my tent. I froze. The air went still, the forest holding its breath. Then a voice whispered my name. It wasn't human, not exactly. It was too low, too drawn out, as if spoken through water. I turned slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam caught something pale between the trees. A face, half buried in mud, eyes open, lips moving soundlessly. It wasn't attached to a body, just a head, half submerged, mouthing words I couldn't hear. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a root. The beam jerked away, and when I looked again, it was gone. The only thing left was the circle of disturbed earth where it had been, breathing faintly in the moonlight. That was the first night I truly considered leaving. Not transferring, leaving the service entirely. But where would I go? The soil under my boots wasn't just the park's anymore. It felt connected to me, like it had claimed something I couldn't take back. I'd wake with dirt under my fingernails, even when I hadn't left the tent. Once I found a streak of mud across my neck in the shape of a handprint. I stopped radioing in my location. I didn't want anyone else involved. If the others came looking, they'd only feed whatever this was. The next morning, I followed the river downstream, hoping to reach the old Ranger Road that led to the highway. But halfway there, I noticed something wrong. The river's flow had changed direction. It was running backward, uphill. The water moved in thick, slow currents, churning with soil, and floating within it, bones, hundreds of them. Small, pale fragments spinning in the current, colliding with each other like teeth grinding in a jaw. The noise made me nauseous. I stumbled to the bank, gripping a tree for balance, and when I looked down, I saw something carved into the trunk. Not initials, not graffiti, words. My name, and beneath it the word, return. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone about the carvings in the cave or about covering the tooth. No one alive could have written that. The ground shook suddenly. Not a tremor, a pulse. The earth swelled and fell in waves like something massive shifting below. Trees groaned as roots tore free. I fell to my knees, mud splattering my face, and for the briefest moment, I saw the soil open. Not like a crack, but like lips parting. A hollow gasp of darkness beneath me. And from that darkness, something rose. Not a creature. At least not in the way we think of them. It was the land itself taking shape, pushing upward in a form almost human but not quite. The surface of its body shimmered like wet clay, glistening in the fading light. Its head tilted toward me, and I could see movement beneath the skin, faces, dozens of them, pressing outward then sinking back in. Their mouths opened and closed in silent rhythm, as if speaking through it. The sound that came next wasn't a roar. It was a collective sigh, deep and sorrowful, echoing through every tree, every rock. The forest bent inward around it, the canopy trembling as if bowing. I could feel the weight of it pressing on my chest, forcing me to kneel. My flashlight died, and in the darkness, I heard that same voice again, no longer whispering. You took what was meant to rest. I wanted to speak, to beg, to apologize, but my voice wouldn't work. The air around me thickened. Then the figure sank back into the soil. The hum faded. The forest exhaled. When I finally stood, dawn was breaking. The river flowed normally again. The ground was still. But something inside me had shifted. The world above didn't feel separate from the world below anymore. It all felt like one breathing body, and I was standing inside its chest. I made it back to the station later that morning, mud up to my knees, shaking from exhaustion. The others were gone, evacuated due to the seismic instability. The cabins were empty, the radio dead. Only one thing remained on the desk, a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the cave entrance, collapsed, sealed with fresh concrete, and scrawled across the bottom in pencil, "Do not dig again." There was no signature, no sender, just that warning. I left that day. I didn't file a report. I didn't look back. I drove until the forest gave way to desert, until the air felt too dry to carry whispers. For a while, I believed I'd escaped, but sometimes when it rains, I hear it again. The hum. Not loud, just faint, like a heartbeat under asphalt. I've tried to tell myself it's just memory. That I'm imagining the vibration in the floorboards, the smell of earth in my clothes, the soil that sometimes collects in the creases of my palms when I wake. But memory doesn't grow. It doesn't spread. Last week, a package arrived at my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a small vial of dirt and a note that said, "It's surfacing." I don't know who sent it. Maybe another ranger. Maybe one of the missing. Maybe the soil itself, finding a new way to reach me. Because that's the thing about secrets buried beneath the soil. They don't stay buried. The earth is patient. It waits until you stop believing in it. And when you do, it remembers you. I didn't open the vial for days. I kept it on the table, still sealed, the grains shifting faintly when I passed by as if stirred by breath. It didn't make sense. Soil shouldn't move on its own. I tried to tell myself it was static or air trapped inside the glass. But I could feel it. Each time I walked past, it felt like the weight in the room changed, as though something small and waiting had noticed me again. 3 nights later, I woke to a faint sound. Not the knocking I'd grown used to, but something subtler, scratching. It was coming from inside the vial. I sat in the dark, heart pounding, and watched as tiny particles pressed against the glass, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I wanted to throw it out, bury it, crush it. Anything to make it stop. But some part of me needed to know. I twisted the lid off. The smell hit me instantly, damp, iron-heavy, unmistakable. The smell of that cave. For a moment, I could swear I was back there, the drip of water echoing somewhere in the dark, my boots sinking into soft clay. I blinked and the room swayed. The floorboards beneath me creaked like they were bending. When I looked back down, the soil wasn't still anymore. It was spreading, slowly crawling out of the vial, a thin stream winding across the table. The grains clung together like something alive, forming tiny ridges, circles, spirals. And at the center of those spirals, the wood of the table began to darken, swelling upward like soft tissue. That was when the whisper started. It wasn't words, not at first. More like the memory of a voice, a vibration in my skull, the same low hum I'd heard in the caves. Then slowly it shaped itself into sound, into meaning. You opened it again. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The soil spread faster now, dripping off the edge of the table and onto the floor. I bolted for the door, flung it open, and ran into the night. The air outside was still heavy. No wind, no insects. Even the sound of the highway a mile away had gone silent. Behind me, inside the cabin, the light flickered. Once. Twice. Then it went dark. I didn't go back until morning. When I did, the table was clean, the vial was empty. But there on the floor where the soil had fallen were prints, not footprints, handprints, small, uneven, pressed deep into the wood, as if something had crawled upward from beneath it. After that, I couldn't stay inside anymore. I started sleeping in my truck, parked by an old service road that hadn't been used since the 60s. Every night I'd drive farther, past farms, through small towns, deep into the desert where nothing grows. But it didn't matter. The hum followed. Sometimes faint, sometimes so loud it rattled the steering wheel. Always the same rhythm, 3 beats. I began recording it. At first, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But when I played the recordings back, the sound wasn't there. Instead, the static arranged itself into fragments of voices. Some I recognized, Mason, Dr. Hammond, even Elliot's shaky breath. Others were strangers. They all spoke the same phrase, layered over each other in broken cadence. Not gone, not beneath, between. That last word lingered, between. It didn't make sense then, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how wrong my understanding of all this had been. I'd always imagined whatever was buried beneath the park as being below us, hidden under layers of dirt and stone. But what if that wasn't true? What if it wasn't underneath at all? What if it was within? The forest hadn't been covering something, it had been containing it. And every time we cut a trail, dug a trench, unearthed a bone, we weren't uncovering history. We were letting something through. That realization came to me the night I reached the old ranger station by the state border. It had been abandoned for years, roof half collapsed, walls blackened from a lightning fire. But the sign still stood, Department of Natural Lands, Sector 7. I'd never worked this far north, but I'd heard rumors. This station had been the original outpost before the park expanded. Some said the first rangers here disappeared during a flood that wasn't on any record. I found a box of maps inside, soaked and curling with age. One caught my eye. It wasn't a topographic survey or visitor layout. It was a series of concentric rings drawn in red pencil, radiating outward from a single point labeled Void Zero. Scribbled next to it were 3 words, surface compromised, seal failed. The date on the map was 1963, the same year the seismic survey report had been written. I felt the air shift. The hum was back. Deeper this time. It came through the walls, through the floor, through me. The boards beneath my boots began to darken, the grain of the wood swelling and splitting. And there, in the widening cracks, I saw movement. Not soil. Eyes. Dozens of them, small and pale, blinking up through the floorboards. I froze, my mind split between terror and fascination. The eyes didn't look at me. They looked through me, reflecting shapes that weren't in the room. Then, as if in unison, they rolled backward and vanished, leaving behind a deep, wet sound like the ground swallowing itself. The floor gave way. I dropped through into darkness. When I hit bottom, my flashlight cracked but didn't die. The beam caught the shape of walls, curved, smooth, lined with carvings identical to the ones I'd seen before. Only this time, the carvings moved. The lines pulsed with faint light, veins glowing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I reached out, couldn't help myself, and the instant my fingertips brushed the surface, a flood of images hit me. Not memories, impressions. A network beneath the world, vast and alive. Roots, tunnels, caverns, millions of them, all connected like arteries, and within them, motion. Not creatures, not ghosts. Something older, something that had no shape until we gave it one by disturbing the earth that held it. I saw faces merging into soil, breath turning into fog, the blood soaking into roots. I saw time-folding miners, rangers, wanderers, all of them drawn into the same slow, endless pulse beneath the surface. And then I saw myself, standing at the cave, holding the tooth in my hand, whispering into the darkness. When I came to, I was lying on the ground outside. Dawn. The station was gone. No debris, no smoke, no sign it had ever been there. Just smooth dirt and a faint spiral etched into the ground. I don't know how long I lay there before I stood. The hum was gone. The silence felt heavier than sound. I drove for hours after that, chasing the horizon until the forest turned to desert again. But even out there, surrounded by dust and distance, I could still feel the ground's quiet rhythm, faint, patient, alive. I don't think it wants to harm us, not in the way we think. I think it just wants us to remember, to know that every step we take, every tree we cut, every grave we dig, it's all part of the same breathing body. The soil remembers, it never forgets. And if you listen closely, really listen, you'll hear it calling too. It's strange how quickly the mind adapts to horror when it becomes routine. The hum became my background noise, my pulse's echo. I'd tell myself it wasn't there, that it was just tinnitus, that the soil wasn't breathing, that the ground beneath my feet wasn't flexing like a lung. But denial doesn't survive when reality starts moving around you. Weeks passed like mist. I stopped counting. I drove north through plains and forests from Montana to Idaho, and every night, no matter where I parked, something found me. Sometimes it was the faint shifting of pebbles under the tires. Sometimes a breath of wind that wasn't wind, carrying a damp, earthy scent that no desert should have. I began to understand it wasn't following me from the park. It was already everywhere. The soil was a single organism, and the park was just one place where the surface had cracked enough for me to see its veins. When I finally reached a small ranger substation near the edge of the Sawtooth Wilderness, I told myself I'd turn in the reports. What little documentation I had left, the maps, the samples, the recordings that refused to play back properly. Maybe someone would believe me. Maybe not. But at least I could leave something behind. The substation was manned by a single ranger, a young woman, maybe mid-20s, named Reese. She looked startled when I walked in, coated in dust and exhaustion. "You look like you've been sleeping in your truck for weeks," she said, forcing a half smile. "I have," I replied. My voice cracked. "I need to report a geological anomaly, possible seismic instability." She tilted her head, scanning me carefully. "Where?" I hesitated. "Everywhere," I said. Her smile faded. "Sir, maybe you should sit down." I dropped my pack onto the table, spreading the maps out. "These are the ridge points," I said, tracing the circles with shaking fingers. "They form a pattern, spirals expanding outward. It's not erosion, it's something else." Reese leaned closer, brow furrowed. "These coordinates don't line up with any known formations." "They shift," I said. "Every few weeks they move. The soil repositions itself. The forests grow around them." She stared at me for a long moment, then quietly said, "You've seen it, haven't you?" That stopped me cold. She reached into a drawer, pulled out an old photograph, and laid it next to my maps. It showed a field station half sunk into the earth, the roof caved in. Around it, the same spirals drawn in the mud. "My grandfather worked there," she said. 1963. He was part of the survey team that first recorded the subsurface movement. They said it was gas pockets, tectonic shift, maybe underground water. But when they sealed the caves, he stopped sleeping. He'd wake up screaming, saying the ground was whispering his name. She paused. "When he died, they found his boots by the back door, full of dirt, packed tight like he'd been walking underground." For the first time in months, I felt something other than fear, recognition. Someone else had seen the same thing long before I was born. Reese exhaled shakily, sitting back. "They called it the hollow pulse. That's what the old records say, but the reports vanished when the park boundaries changed. Officially, it doesn't exist anymore." The hum deepened then, faint but unmistakable. The lights flickered. We both froze. "You feel that?" I asked. She nodded. "It's been happening more lately. At first, we thought it was geothermal activity, but..." She trailed off, her eyes drifting toward the floor. A crack ran across the linoleum with a soft groan. Beneath it, something shifted. We backed away as the floor began to ripple, slowly, like waves under skin. Reese reached for the emergency radio, but the static turned to that low, rhythmic knocking, 3 beats. The same pattern. "Don't answer," I whispered. Then came the whisper, not from the floor this time, but from the walls, from the foundation itself. Dozens of voices speaking as one, all layered into a single sound that vibrated through the air like music. "You buried us. We grew." The boards beneath us bowed upward. I grabbed Reese's arm and pulled her toward the door. She resisted, frozen in disbelief. "What is it?" she cried. "Not what," I said. "Where?" We ran outside just as the ground behind us cracked open. The building didn't collapse. It was swallowed. The soil rose up, folding around it like a mouth closing. Within seconds, it was gone. Only the spiral remained. We stood there panting, covered in dust, listening to the hum fade into silence. Reese stared at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "You knew," she whispered. I nodded weakly. "I've been hearing it for months, but now it's louder." We drove west that night, through dark valleys and narrow canyons, neither of us saying much. Every few miles, the headlights caught strange shapes on the roadside, patterns carved into the dirt, faint ridges that looked disturbingly like ribs. Around dawn, Reese pulled over. The sun was rising over a field of pines, the light golden and quiet. For a moment, it felt peaceful. She looked at me, exhausted. "If this hollow pulse has been spreading all these years, there's no way to stop it, is there?" I stared out the windshield, thinking of the caves, the faces, the breath beneath the earth. "No," I said finally. "You don't stop the soil. You just learn what it's saying." She frowned. "And what's it saying to you?" I turned to her. "That it's awake." The silence that followed was heavy. She started the engine again, but before she could shift gears, the radio clicked on by itself. No static, just breathing. Then a faint voice, deep and slow, spoke through the speakers. "You left the door open." Reese slammed the radio off, trembling. "What door?" she asked. I didn't answer. Because I knew. The cave, the tooth, the vial, the soil I'd released wasn't contained by land or distance anymore. Whatever had been buried wasn't trapped underground. It was part of the world now. It was beneath every road, every city, every home. We drove until we hit the coast, where cliffs dropped straight into the Pacific. I'd always thought the ocean would feel safer, something the soil couldn't touch. But as the waves crashed below, I noticed the sand patterns at the base of the cliffs. Circles, spirals. Reese saw them too. "It's here," she said quietly. I nodded. "It never left." That night, we camped by the water. The waves sounded almost like breathing. As the tide rose, I watched the sand darken, tiny bubbles rising and bursting in rhythm. Reese lay awake beside the fire, staring at the sky. "Maybe it's not trying to hurt us," she murmured. "Maybe it's trying to come home." I didn't know what to say. When dawn came, the sand where we'd slept was covered in prints. Our own, but deeper, as if someone heavier had walked inside them during the night. That was the last time I saw Reese. She left before sunrise, said she was going to follow the pattern north, track the tremors, maybe warn others. I didn't stop her. You can't warn people about something they're already standing on. Now I move constantly, never staying in one place long enough for the ground to remember me. But I still feel it. Sometimes in the rumble of a subway train, sometimes in the vibration of my own heartbeat against the floor. The line between us and it has thinned. Maybe it was never there at all. They say the ground remembers, but maybe it's not memory. Maybe it's hunger. I started keeping notes after Reese left. Obsessive, detailed notes on everything. Tremors, animal behavior, soil composition, the way the sound changed depending on elevation. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about understanding what I'd awakened, or what had awakened me. At first, the data looked meaningless. Random spikes in vibration, unexplained magnetic shifts, brief surges of static at specific frequencies. But when I layered them over the old survey maps, something took shape. A web. The points connected across hundreds of miles, converging on one faint flickering signal that pulsed every 21 hours, like a heartbeat under the continent. And at the center of that pulse was the park. I drove back. I told myself I wouldn't get close, that I'd just watch from the ridge road. But I think part of me knew I'd never be free until I saw it again. The access road was half buried now. Grass and young pines had already claimed the cracks in the asphalt. The signs were gone. The entrance kiosk had collapsed into the mud, its roof torn off by years of storms. I parked the truck and stepped out. The air was different. Heavy, metallic, humming. The park was breathing. Fog rolled low through the trees, hugging the ground. I could feel the pulse under my boots, slow, steady, ancient. The forest didn't look dead, but it didn't look alive either. The trees were wrong, angled subtly inward, their trunks bending toward the center of the valley like worshippers bowing before something unseen. I hiked for miles before I reached the clearing where the old outpost used to stand. There was no cabin now, no station, no trace of human construction, only a wide, circular depression in the earth, smooth as a bowl. I knew, without needing to check, that this was the spot where it had all started, the first cave, the first bones, the first whisper. The soil shimmered faintly in the sunlight, damp even though the air was dry. I knelt, pressing my hand to the ground. The warmth beneath it pulsed once, slow, rhythmic. And then I heard it. Welcome back. I jerked my hand away, but the sound was inside me now, vibrating behind my ribs. I stumbled back, breath ragged, as the soil at the center of the clearing began to shift. The surface rippled outward, spiraling just like before, but faster, urgent. And then rising from the middle came something I still can't explain. It looked like a tree at first, a thick, twisted trunk of blackened roots pushing upward through the dirt, but the longer I looked, the less it looked like wood. The surface wasn't bark, it was flesh. The roots glistened wetly, gluing themselves together as they grew. Within moments it towered over me, pulsing with each beat of the earth's hum, and embedded in its base, faces, hundreds of them, pressed into the surface, eyes closed, mouths slightly open as though singing silently. Their skin was pale and smooth, merging seamlessly with the roots. I recognized some of them: Hammond, Mason, Elliot, even Reese. Even Reese. Her face was turned upward, her mouth parted as if mid-breath. I screamed her name. The sound vanished into the trees. Then her eyes opened. They were black, glistening with that same mud-dark sheen. Her mouth moved, and though her lips didn't make a sound, the air filled with whispering voices, hundreds of overlapping tones, all speaking at once. We are the soil. I backed away, tripping on a fallen branch, but the thing kept growing, the hum deepening until it felt like the air itself was vibrating. The forest bent inward, branches creaking, leaves shaking loose. I couldn't tell if I was hearing words or just the echo of my own mind unraveling. Then, in one violent tremor, the entire clearing split open. The ground fell away beneath me, and I dropped into darkness. I don't know how long I fell, seconds, minutes, maybe hours. When I hit bottom, I was surrounded by warmth and sound. The air was thick, humid, glowing faintly red like light seen through skin. The walls pulsed. The ground was soft, alive, breathing beneath me. I realized then I was inside it, inside the Earth's body. The tunnel ahead curved downward, lined with those same spiraling carvings, only now they weren't etched. They were grown, like veins or nerves. And from somewhere deep within came a rhythmic noise, low and resonant, a heartbeat. Each thump shook the air, vibrating through my bones. With every pulse, a new memory flashed behind my eyes. Not mine, but others. The miners, the rangers, the lost hikers. All of them seeing the same thing. All of them hearing the same hum before they vanished. And beneath all of it, a voice. We remember what you bury. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even human. It felt like the voice of everything that's ever been covered in dirt. Bones, roots, secrets. The collective murmur of everything we've tried to hide underfoot. I don't remember walking deeper, but suddenly I was standing at the edge of a massive chamber. The ceiling rose high above me, slick with moisture, glimmering faintly in the dim red light. And at the center of the cavern was a shape that made my mind rebel against what it saw. A column of flesh and stone twisting upward, fused with root and bone, faces blooming like flowers across its surface. Every inch of it moved slightly, breathing, twitching, whispering. I wanted to run, but the hum pinned me in place. Then the soil around my boots shifted, softening, pulling me downward inch by inch. I fought to stay upright, but it was like sinking into warm sand. The voices grew louder, their whispers merging into a single phrase that filled my skull like thunder. Return to the soil. Join the remembering. I screamed. I don't even know what I said. Maybe I begged. Maybe I cursed it. The light flared, red, then white. And in that blinding moment, I saw every layer of earth above me as if the ground had turned transparent. I saw the forest, the rivers, the mountains. I saw every body ever buried in it. And then I saw the surface rippling, spreading outward in all directions. Roads, cities, entire regions shifting like skin on muscle. The earth wasn't reacting to us anymore. It was waking up. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the sound of 1,000 heartbeats blending into one. When I woke, I was lying on the ridge, sunlight burning through the trees. My body was covered in mud, my nails black with soil. The clearing was gone. No spiral, no roots, no hum, just silence. I don't know how I escaped. Maybe it let me go. Maybe it needed someone left to remember. I left the park that day for the last time. I didn't take the maps. I didn't take the notes. Everything I'd recorded was already in me, etched into my thoughts, my heartbeat, my blood. Now wherever I go, I can feel the rhythm of the ground beneath me. The same slow pulse, patient and constant. It's everywhere. In the tremor of bridges, the soft shift of sand dunes, the vibration of the seafloor. The world isn't solid. It's alive. And when I close my eyes, I can still hear Reese's voice beneath it all, whispering from somewhere deep below. You opened it again. It's been months since I came back from the park, though time doesn't feel linear anymore. Some days stretch forever, others vanish like they never existed. The soil beneath my feet, any soil, feels like it's breathing just beneath the surface. I keep trying to pretend I'm normal again, that I can blend back into the rhythm of people who don't know the ground remembers. But the world hums now, low and constant, like the resonance of a hidden organ. I rent a small place near the desert's edge, a cabin on hardpan earth where nothing grows. I thought maybe that would quiet it, but the silence here has a texture, like it's waiting to be broken. The nights are the worst. That's when I hear it through the floor, slow, steady pulses that sync perfectly with my heartbeat. I've started recording again, not to prove anything to anyone, but to chart how the hum changes. Some nights it's low, barely audible. Others it shifts into something almost melodic, like breath through a hollow pipe. When I analyze the waveform, it repeats in threes, 3 beats, always 3. Sometimes I hear whispers woven into it, words that come and go before I can catch them. I used to think they were echoes from memory, Hammond, Mason, Reese, but now I think it's something else. I think it's the soil itself trying to learn speech. A week ago, I noticed something strange outside. The ground around the cabin had begun to ripple, subtle, like the tremor before a quake, but constant. When I stepped outside to check, I found small circles of disturbed dust, perfectly symmetrical. Each one contained a single white object. Teeth. Dozens of them, half buried and clean, arranged like seeds ready to sprout. I didn't touch them. I just stood there, staring, the desert wind dragging its long breath across the dunes. I could have sworn I heard faint laughter, not cruel, not joyful, just ancient. That night, I dreamed of Reese again. She was standing in a field of ash, her hair moving as though underwater. The air around her shimmered with heat, and the ground beneath her feet pulsed with light. When she looked at me, her eyes were black as soil, and her voice came through the hum. "It's not under us anymore," she said. "It's through us." I woke to find dirt under my fingernails again. The same iron-sweet smell filled the air. I burned the sheets, moved the bed, scrubbed the floorboards. It didn't matter. The smell always came back. Then the lights began to flicker. 3 times. Then stillness. The power company said there were no outages in the area. But I knew. It was the pattern again. The rhythm. The reminder. I drove out into the desert the next day. I don't even know what I was looking for. Maybe proof that I wasn't insane. Maybe the edge of it, if such a thing exists. I parked miles from any road, stepped into the endless flatness, and walked until I couldn't see the truck anymore. The air shimmered with heat, the horizon trembling like the surface of a living thing. Then I saw them. Circles. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Perfect rings pressed into the desert floor, each one large enough to swallow a house. From above, they might have looked like ripples from a stone dropped into an ocean. From the ground, they looked like scars. I walked to the center of the nearest one and crouched down. The soil there was darker, looser. I brushed it with my fingers. It was warm. Beneath the surface, something shifted, slowly like muscle flexing. I froze. The hum started again, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't just sound, it was pressure, moving through me, through everything. My bones vibrated, my teeth ached, and for a second I thought I saw the ground rise and fall, as though breathing. I whispered into it, "What do you want?" The answer came, soft as wind through dry grass. To remember. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even separate. It felt like it came from inside my chest. I don't know how long I stayed there, kneeling in the sun, my hand pressed to the earth. The hum grew steadier, calmer. I started feeling connected. Not terrified. Not anymore. Just aware. Like I was part of something enormous and alive that didn't care about human definitions of fear or time. But then, just as suddenly, the calm broke. The soil beneath me convulsed, and the air filled with a deep guttural sound, like thousands of voices gasping at once. The circles around me began to sink, collapsing inward, forming funnels that twisted into the ground. Dust erupted into the air. I stumbled back, choking, as the desert opened itself. And then, through the haze, I saw movement. Figures. Dozens of them, rising slowly from the pits, shapes made of dust and bone and soil, faces blurred, limbs forming and dissolving like smoke. They weren't walking, they were unfurling. Some crawled, some floated, some reached upward with hands that disintegrated into sand. They surrounded me but didn't touch. They stood still, heads tilted, faces flickering through forms I recognized. Hammond, Mason, Reese. Even my own reflection among them, distorted and shifting. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The air trembled with one unified whisper, "You are part of the remembering." And in that instant, I understood what it meant. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't vengeance. It was absorption. Everything that's ever touched the soil, every voice, every body, every secret, it all feeds into the same endless pulse beneath us. We don't return to dust when we die. We return to memory. When I opened my eyes again, it was night. The desert was still. The circles were gone. My footprints were the only marks left. But when I looked down, my hands were stained black to the wrists, and faint patterns, spirals, had formed beneath the skin, glowing softly before fading into nothing. Now, wherever I go, I see signs of it spreading. Cracks in sidewalks shaped like veins, grass growing in perfect circles, rivers that shift direction by inches every year, the hum in engines and train tracks and thunder. The earth no longer sleeps. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still feel that warmth under my feet, the heartbeat beneath everything. It's not fear anymore, it's awareness. The soil doesn't need us to believe in it. It remembers us anyway. And when it calls again, I don't think I'll run. I think I'll listen. Because maybe that's what we were meant to do all along, not to conquer the land, not to own it, not even to protect it, just to remember with it, to sink and to join and to become part of the hum that never stops. The earth was never silent. We just forgot how to hear it, and now it's teaching us again.